financial freedom seekers, Simon Dixon here. Today, I'm going to share with you about Bitcoin's final tests. The two things that I'm looking to have complete conviction in my belief around what Bitcoin means for the future. For those of you not familiar with my content, for the last 12 years, having been involved in Bitcoin and investing in over 100 companies, writing the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin in 2011, and giving content on the subject since that first Bitcoin conference, I have seen all the different cycles, and I'm looking for two more tests. And the irony of this situation is most people will wait till these tests have been completed until they buy Bitcoin. And that will exit Bitcoin from what I call the speculative store of value stage to what I believe will become the store of value stage once it passes these final two tests. Now, here's the thing. If you want to benefit most with the highest level of risk, which equals the most downside if it goes wrong, then you have to be in Bitcoin during the speculative stage, because eventually it can become a store of value when most of the Bitcoins are mined, which they are right now, and all the final tests have been completed. So if you've been watching any of my content over the years, you'll know that I only have a few rules. And one of those rules is that I have more Bitcoin each month than I did the previous month. And if you implement that into your life, but not based upon money that you need to spend, money that you save because you're managing your finances, as I've covered in many, many different videos. Check out the one I did on the 1st of January on how to make 2023 the best financial year ever. So before I go through the two tests, let's go through the tests of the past in my journey. So I break Bitcoin up into 4-year cycles, and 4-year cycles are normally centered around the halving. The halving is the event where the number of Bitcoins that miners receive for validating transactions halves every 10 minutes. So every 4 years it halves, and you receive new Bitcoins for those that are validating the transactions every 10 minutes, which prevents it needing a central bank or a government authority, and it creates what's called this decentralized network based upon proof of work. So what was the first test? Well, the first test happened in cycle 1, and it was centralization. So when Bitcoin launched, Satoshi Nakamoto, the group of people or the individual person, the founders as it were, they released and did the Immaculate Conception. It was created as a white paper in 2008 and launched in 2009. And the Genesis block was launched in 2009, the first ever block where miners receive a reward every 10 minutes. And Satoshi Nakamoto was the first miner and sent the first Bitcoin to Hal Finney a few days later on the 12th of January 2009, but accumulated in those early Bitcoin wallets approximately 1 million Bitcoins, and Bitcoin was deeply centralized, as do all cryptocurrencies that launched, but there was no pre-mine, or it wasn't, like you see with other cryptocurrencies, or no unfair launch. Anyone could mine, but no one wanted to mine. And the beauty of it, there was no exchanges and no one cared. So no one was speculating on the price. Nobody cared about it. It was just a unique, kind of niche product for hackers that wanted to transfer value. And then it organically grew from this Immaculate Conception, creating its today's commodity-like features, which are impossible to replicate, that no one has successfully replicated since. So cycle 1 was all about surviving centralization. And the problem with all of the alternatives cryptocurrency is the centralization problem. And so Bitcoin had allowed miners to mine on their laptop to solve this. And as more and more people started mining, they started using graphic cards known as GPUs. And then as the value went up and it started to become more of a speculative tool, as well as a tool that was used on Silk Road and WikiLeaks and various other websites that suffered from mass censorship, it became more and more adopted and more used. And then people started creating ASICs, which are special machines to mine Bitcoin. And then it became a very sophisticated industry where miners were competing. So the Immaculate Conception made it where miners gradually, it became more and more decentralized, and miners were held to check by nodes. And by keeping the block size, as it grew, the network grew, by keeping the block size smaller, it meant more and more people could afford to run a node, and therefore people could validate their own transactions, making it to the point where it was statistically virtually impossible to rationally perform what's known as a 51% attack, which is where you control over 50% of the network. Whenever any mining pool got close to 50%, everyone distributed it through different mining pools, and Bitcoin became the most, the one that where the rules are the hardest to change, and it passed the decentralized. It became more decentralized. More than anything else that's ever launched since. It's still got its imperfections, but it passed. The first cycle was getting through centralization. So what was the second cycle, or the test? The big test of the second cycle was getting past law enforcement. So more and more people were using this in order to stay at home rather than go to the streets and risk getting shot by gangs, where they could control the quality of drugs that they were purchasing online, and where individual citizens could hold governments to account by publishing documents on WikiLeaks, so that we could protect democracy and freedom of speech. And obviously governments didn't like that one bit at all. And so Bitcoin started to build a big reputation, and really there were many, many times when it looks like law enforcement were going to close it down. And they were either going to try and make it where it comes in line with money laundering obligations, but there was no centralized entity because of the Bitcoin past first test on centralization. And then they were trying to figure out who they could knock on the doors, but because there were so many nodes validating the transactions, there was no single point of failure that they could attack. Satoshi Nakamoto remained anonymous. There was no founder, passed on the key to the GitHub repo to Gavin Andreessen, and then it followed an open source code and review and system for releasing code where the entire ecosystem had to reach its consensus in order to get the code released. And whenever companies tried to attack it, they failed. Whenever miners tried to attack it, they failed. Whenever developers tried to attack it, they failed. And whenever governments and law enforcement tried to attack it, they failed. So it passed the second test. If it was ever going to be shut down, that was the time during cycle 2 for it to be shut down by governments, but they couldn't because it passed test 1 on the centralization test. So what was the third cycle test? Well, the third cycle test was all of the altcoins and shitcoins and tokens, and everyone saying, I can create a bigger, better, badder, faster, cheaper, meaner, leaner version of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin shit, it's a dinosaur, check out my new technology. And they always failed for the same reasons why Bitcoin passed the centralization test in the beginning. It was created by a character, a founder, somewhere where you could knock on the door. It had a pre-mine. It was a token that wasn't focused on decentralization. They didn't pass the 51% attack, or they couldn't get a mining proof of work network going. So they had some kind of alternative that meant that more people controlled the network. And so it passed all of the altcoins, tokens. We had this moment where Bitcoin Cash, because it increased the block size, was meant to take over Bitcoin. And we learned all of the lessons from the third attack when nobody could replicate the original tests and pass the original tests. And so it passed the altcoin test or the Bitcoin killer test, whatever you want to call it. So then we moved into cycle 4. What was cycle 4? Well, cycle 4 was where it passed the fourth test. And the fourth test was the ESG narrative, which is that Bitcoin is going to consume all the world's electricity, and it's the most inefficient thing in the world, and therefore we should go for proof of stake. And we shouldn't support that, and we should put taxes on Bitcoin. We should get rid of Bitcoin. It's not environmentally official. And also we're going to survive the second part of that, which is governments just outright banning it. So China banned the exchanges, the mining, almost all of the mining was happening in China, or the majority of it. In fact, people were criticizing Bitcoin because too much mining was happening in China, where electricity was a lot cheaper. Well, it passed that test. All of the mining was redistributed around the world. New industries came along, and people started focusing on how to make Bitcoin more environmentally friendly and comparing it to the cost of the central banking infrastructure. And then new developments came along where you had clean Bitcoin mining industries competing in the free markets. Industries were born where the electricity was used from wasted industries, which gave companies more efficiency in their processes, and the free markets take over when you allow it to solve its issue. People can choose which ones they want to mine with, whether they're investing in energy efficient. So as new institutions join the industry that has an ESG policy or governance structure, they could choose which Bitcoins they mine and various other things, and the free market just does its thing. And so it passed the ESG narrative, it passed the China ban, it passed the altcoin attack, it passed the law enforcement attack, and it passed the the centralization test. So now we know the history. For me, I'm looking for Bitcoin to transition from what I call a speculative store of value, where you've had abnormal asymmetric returns from everybody that's been investing in it over, say, a more traditional store of value like gold. And the final two tests that I'm looking for, we are going through the second of the final two tests right now. And that is that Bitcoin was created in 2008. And 2008 was where the governments decided to prop up the debt-based Ponzi scheme by taking all of the consumer debt through subprime mortgages, all of the corporate debt through bailouts, and all of the government debt, and rehypothecate it into a bigger Ponzi scheme by solving the problem of too much debt with more debt through quantitative easing. And quantitative easing is essentially the removal of free markets, where companies were borrowing from the central bank to prop up stock markets. Governments were borrowing from the central bank in order to implement policies whereby people could buy their first real estate or property, and therefore individuals ballooned their debt cycles through credit cards, student loans, mortgages, and we pumped up the cycle through quantitative easing, leading to the cost of living crisis that we're experiencing today, to the point where inflation gets so bad that they need to reverse the quantitative easing policy. And so Bitcoin has only ever been alive during quantitative easing cycles and debt-based Ponzi schemes. So the second test of the final two tests that I'm looking for is, does Bitcoin follow the 4-year halving cycle, which tends to be that 1 year before halving, the next one is in 2024, you enter at some stage in the year before halving into a bull market, and that kicks off a 4-year bull market where it reaches new all-time highs. We have never had that test during a quantitative tightening phase or a phase of either radical war or change of empire, or some of the bigger trends as a result of all the monetary renegotiation that I've covered in previous videos of the dollar debt-based Ponzi scheme that we are in right now. So if for the next 2 to 3 years, that cycle repeats itself and we go through quantitative tightening, recession, wars, pandemics, whatever it is that we go through, then to me, it has passed the fact that it doesn't need the dollar-based Ponzi scheme in order to maintain its fundamentals of money you can own, money that you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply. And therefore, it transitions to one more test of whether this is just a speculative store of value or a full store of value. And the final test is the 6th cycle that I will look for Bitcoin to survive, go through the 4-year cycle, and reach new all-time highs in a world of central bank digital currencies. So central bank digital currencies are the inevitable destiny for all countries that want to continue the debt-based Ponzi scheme. If the only way to deleverage without causing a mass recession is to take more control over money and launch money that's not based upon debt and allow the banks to go bust by replacing people's money at a bank when a bank goes bust with a central bank digital currency, which is essentially washing a debt-based money with a non-debt-based money, and moving more to modern monetary theory and emergence between central banks and governments, where you could even see at its extreme emerging of their balance sheets, operating more from a fascist, socialist, communist style of directing, and artificial intelligence and technology being integrated so that government policy is enforced through controlling the money supply directly and integrating algorithmic government policies into that central bank digital currencies. Every country, inevitably, predictably, and guaranteed, I believe, only has one way of unwinding their debt-based Ponzi scheme if they're not accumulating hard money, Bitcoin, and looking for an alternative strategy should the speculative store of value Bitcoin transition to a more a stable store of value like gold is today. And remember, a store of value is not about building wealth, it's about preserving wealth by beating the debt-based Ponzi scheme so that your savings are relatively higher as a result of fiat currency being inflated away. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, please return to the video on the 1st of January called How to Make 2023 the Best Financial Year Ever. So those are the final two tests that I'm looking for to transition Bitcoin into a speculative store of value, into a store of value. And I think we've got 8 years to go through those tests, maybe a little bit faster given the rate of change and depending on any of the macro and geopolitical events that we don't control as well. Which means that if for the next 6 to 8 years you implement some of the things that I do, which is that each and every month I ensure I've got more Bitcoin than the previous month. I separate my buckets as covered in previous videos. Then everybody has 6 to 8 years to figure out how to spend less than they earn, invest the difference in savings, and then as their savings and wealth grows, if this thesis works out, remember previous videos where I covered the different eventualities that I invest into, change of empire, dollar-based Ponzi scheme, and exit from traditional finance, then you are still an early adopter, and the best thing that can happen to you is to be accumulating into a bear market, which is where dollar cost averaging works the best. So I hope you enjoyed that, and always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get absolutely wrecked, others are going to do really well, and I want you to stay on the right side of that change. How does that happen? Do me a favor, like this video so more people can stay on the right side of the change. Do that favor. Allow more people to experience this content. The algorithms matter. The more people that watch it, and put a comment below and let me know what you'd like me to cover in future videos, and share with me your commitment to owning more Bitcoin each month than you did the previous month if you think this makes sense and is right for you, not financial advice, obviously. Also, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell symbol, hit all, and I'll notify you each and every time we go live. I go live as a reward for you holding me accountable. I check in to work out each day, and I give a stupid video from my gym, even though it makes no sense, but it's easy for me to do that. So we're doing this with peace, we're doing this love, we're doing this unity. I shall see you tomorrow in the next video. Leave a comment, like, subscribe. Peace.